So this idea's been stewing in my head since around, say, January of this year. I was coming up with a lot of different ideas for stuff I wanted to make around the stuff I was into. Some of that won't be making it off the cutting board as things go with creative projects. But I was pretty fixated on this one because it didn't seem too hard to do and seemed like something that I already do a lot in my off time, but never formally or never in a very put together kind of setup, let alone with any other people. I like writing the scraps of worlds. Well, less writing and more. I sit around and daydream really, really wacky sort of personal ideas based on stuff I've watched and read, and I put it together into this whole thing. And then I do a lot of nothing with it. So I figured I'd put a little twist on that. Today I have two guests with me, and all we're going to do, there's going to be nothing, no real moving bits. It's just going to be us putting together a world together. We're going to be setting the scene for our own little planet, our own little written piece of fiction, or spoken piece of fiction in this case. It's going to be a pretty basic affair, but before I get into how this is sort of going to work, why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves? Most people know me if you're here. My name is Zartimus. I stream primarily on twitch.tv. I have a YouTube channel, a Twitter, all that good jazz. I am mostly a gacha streamer, mostly Fate Grand Order, but I have been playing tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons since 3rd edition. I've gone through 3rd edition, 3.5, Pathfinder, 4th edition, 5th edition. I've done Warhammer 40k specifically. I've done Warhammer Fantasy. I've done just a whole gob Pokemon or tabletop RPGs. I've done Gundam style stuff, just a whole bunch. Mostly as a player, though I have done I want to say 20% share of GMing out of all of those experiences. So I'm used to this sort of thing, but I'm not anywhere close to a master. Also at the table, we have Darth Hentai, Fletch. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Everyone, it's Darth. I have been GM for most of my gaming experiences. I got my start actually back in first ed D&D, the Red Box era, and have been running and playing things ever since. I think I've confused more gaming systems in together than most people around here may have played. I don't know, but just the way it seems some days. um, Egos are talking. Uh, that's really it.
No problem, no problem. That's where we're at. I can confirm this man has touched more systems than I knew existed. We'll get there eventually. I have to believe one day. And Severs, where we're at.
Hi, I'm Severs. I've um not quite had the breadth that Darth has in gaming, but I have been playing for roughly about 25 years. And I've been mostly a player, but I've done my share of GMing as well. I've played in everything from the various D&D lands and their adjacents to BattleTech to World of Darkness to Exalted Scion, several homebrew systems. I've played in games with these fine gentlemen. Um, and in the few times that I have GM'd, I ventured into the world building process and build my own homebrew worlds as well. So, yeah, nice to be here.
Good to have you, Severs. Good to have you. I think something else worth mentioning is probably what we're currently up to and what we've been kind of really into, like our favorite stuff. Currently, I am not running or playing in anything. However, I am currently writing my own tabletop RPG system, kind of a love letter, an homage to Final Fantasy as a whole. That's coming pretty close to, I don't even want to call it a 1.0, it feels like a 0.5, but that's about to go into mechanical testing pretty soon, and despite saying that, it's supposed to be starting sometime next month. So that's going to be my current go-to, where I'm going to be running that. And probably my favorite is somewhere that I've ever played, somewhere between either, I want to say the second Ruby tabletop RPG that Fletch here GM'd for me, or there were a couple Pokemon settings, and I think my favorite of those that I played in was probably one that was sort of had the gym setup of, I want to say, Pokemon Sun and Moon, but it was less island based. I think it was Europeanish. All I remember is that there was this really neat gym battle that they basically set up like a chessboard. And that sticks in my head to this day. But I think most of the Pokemon games I've played are pretty up there for me. What do you think, Severs? What are you currently into, and what were kind of the big tabletop experiences that stick out in your mind as your favorites?
Well, right now I am involved in some games. I have um 3 games that I'm playing in currently. All of them are D&D 5th edition. Um, and I, they are immense fun for me. But as far as my favorites go, um, I actually ended up thinking about it, and um, I've really enjoyed some of the modern settings that I've played in, and my favorites probably being um, either Scion, which was run by Darth Hare, um, or um, a game I believe Darth was a player in, which was a World of Darkness children's campaign and an Innocence campaign.
Summer
So
of
yeah,
Darkness. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Fletch?
Um, I am currently running one, assisting in running and playing in a second. I basically go through and handle most of the Nipsey creation and whatnot for the GM. Uh, they're very creative, but math isn't their strong suit, so I handle that part. Um, uh, and have D&D 5 ed thing in the works with one of the guys in the other group who he's a rookie. He's a rookie GM, and he's wanting to learn the ropes. So he's you asked me and some others to go through and play through with him. And thank you guys both for listening to games that I ran as some of your favorites. Seriously, touched. Um, like most GMs, I kind of assume my games are crap. So
You have to, because part of GMing, it feels like part of it that feels really just built in almost is that you assume that your setting is just something that you wrote, and that like it's not gonna be the next Lord of the Rings. It's not gonna be the new Cyberpunk. It's not gonna be Avatar or anything. It's just something you wrote to have fun. I feel like that's built in. You don't really get a choice about that one. But the players tend to appreciate a living world when it comes to them.
definitely.
it's also funny Simon was mentioned because that's the game I'm currently running for this other group for servers here. It's another trip into Guam.
Ah.
And yeah, the Summer of Darkness campaign he referenced was a really good game. It had the lightning.
Lightning?
Catching lightning in a bottle?
Oh.
It was a combination of the right players, the right characters, the GM going through and just both caring and not caring enough at the same time to have everything flow together perfectly. Sometimes you're lucky enough to get that spark, and he had it. It was really good.
How long did the campaign last?
Oh, I want to say that was a good 8 months.
Yeah, I want to say 8 or 9 months, maybe.
Yeah, and
He,
that's
he- I
and
knew
that's
it was.
actual runtime, not like the gaps between. If you count the gaps between, it was like a year and a half.
Yeah, about to say. I knew it was like shy of a year, but but it was still quality.
Did the campaign end because the story finished, or did life stuff happen?
The story finished. It actually reached an organic end, which we then were gonna do. We then actually did a game following it up, which wasn't as good, but it was still good.
Okay.
It fell in the trap of moving into the zoo, if you will, since it went from New Wad's Innocence into a New Wad zoo game. For those who
Mm.
understand, zoo games are where you go through and allow any of the splats to be used here.
Oh.
And there is certain power discrepancies. Some of the fan-made stuff is a little more powerful than others. Some of the original stuff is a little more powerful than others, etc.
Splat books are where mechanics go to get interesting, for better or worse.
Splat
Which
proliferation is the issue, yeah.
which is, I guess, problematic that I'm already considering making a splat book for the setting I'm writing, despite being in 0.5. But we'll worry about that problem another day, I think.
I mean, as long as you're going in with the idea of this is what we're doing, and we're gonna have to make sure things are kept on a balance. And if things get too far in the splat book, that you will then have to go back into original work and change that to mess with the dynamic. And it's fine. It's just most companies don't want to go back to previous material.
Mm.
Or they have different unconnected teams working on different things, whereas
Mm-hmm.
you've got kind of the one man operation going over there.
Like with the different teams thing, Palladium is bad with that one. You have people who weren't part of the original team going through and making different books. One person insisting that their faction is the best and forgetting the fact that, it was hard coded into canon that this is the strongest faction in setting right now. Everyone's doing but my baby. So in the end, Kev had to go through in another book and say, this is the reason why this faction is the strongest, please stop.
Yes, the disconnected writers back and forth with my OC is the best. A tale as old as time. I think there's tales of like ancient Greek and Romans like writing across a lake about some stuff. It culminates in like them coming across into having a fight.
I think it was the Greeks, yeah.
Oh, it is never stopped. Time is just a whole circle, dude. But we've kind of given an idea of who we are and where we lay. So let's talk about why we're here today. The basic premise for this entire deal, this, I hesitate to call it a podcast, but maybe it is well, the name essentially is setting the scene. What we're looking to do is go from the top down and create a whole homebrew setting. It doesn't have a system to it. It doesn't have more than a few rules for us to work with, but it's going to be a big collaborative effort. And at the end of it, hopefully we will have enough of a whole setting that any one of us or any of the listeners can come through and use this world in a game or a writing piece. And it's going to be just out there for anyone to gander at, to have thoughts about, to write and think about. Normally well, I say normally as if this isn't the precedent, but we're going to typically have a layout where there will be some things set at the start. There's going to be a framework and a very bare bones set of rules so that we have some place to bounce the creativity around inside of. And we're just going to play around with the scope. So if this ends up being a series, something I'd like to do is just change how things get passed around and how the scope of the setting is viewed. So, for example, for this one, we don't have to worry about naming the setting. I'm just going to call it Pilot as the very first little test subject we have here. It's going to be a fantasy setting because that's where a lot of this kind of roots out from. It's fair to say that a lot of people have their first tabletop experiences, probably their first homebrew experiences in the D&D setting, which is naturally based off fantasy. That doesn't mean it's not going to have the opportunity to have modern or sci-fi elements, but the roots are going to stay very firmly in the fantasy realm this time. And the scope we're going to use from this time is we're going to use a shrinking scope. We're going to start at the sort of planetary level, anything that happens, space, the planet as a whole, and we're going to slowly shrink down, and we're going to be using a round-robin format, which means one of us will present an idea, and then the next person will present an idea, then the third person will present an idea, and it'll go around in a circle like that as we shrink the scope, spiral down into the planet, maybe come back out once or twice, and by the time we're done, we should have a full collaborative setting made. The only other rule besides that is that you cannot deny or reject someone else's idea that they have applied to the world. You can use a yes, but. You can say, for example, yes, we have orcs that are rampaging across this country, but they are only rampaging down the eastern seaboard because they only eat seafood or something like that. You cannot say, no, the orcs are not rampaging. You cannot completely gainsay somebody else's idea. So that is kind of the format we're working with here. Everything okay with that, guys? Any ideas on it?
Yeah, works really well.
Sounds good to me.
All right, cool. Then we will start our tale in the planetary level of Pilot. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off, give us a round base, kind of an example of what we're working with here. So baseline here, nothing is applied. We're essentially dealing with a ball in space that has no attributes. So I will go ahead and say that let's give Pilot, I don't want to do too much, too little here. I think I want to say, let's say Pilot has 3 continents and all of them are aware of each other. We're going to have 2 larger continents and 1 smaller continent. So from here, I will go ahead and pass it around. So we're going to start, the way we have each other on visuals is it's Fletch, Severs, then me. So I'm going to pass it around to Fletch.
Okay, so we have the established 3 continents, 2 large, 1 small, and they'll know each other. I want to go through and put a island chain in, much like the Ring of Fire, between the smaller one and one of the larger ones.
Okay. So island chain between one of this smaller continent and one of the larger ones, right?
Yeah. Creating that sort of Ring of Fire effect. much like you see between Asia and Australia.
Okay, okay. And then that would roll down to Severs.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to go with somewhere in the world, maybe on a continent, maybe not on a continent even. But there is a to use the trope, there is a world tree. There is some giant, very powerful, very important um, landmark, probably organic landmark, that if something were to happen to it, it would be catastrophic worldwide.
Okay. Cool, cool, cool. So that's round 1 on the planetary scale. So in total, we have 3 continents, 2 large, 1 small, an island chain between one of the large continents and one of the small continents, or the small continent rather. And somewhere on the planet of Pilot, there is a world tree-like structure. So if something happens to that, the whole planet probably goes kaput. So let's do 2 rounds on each scale for now. Let's see how that works out. We'll do 2 rounds on each scale and then we'll shrink it down. So let's see. What else are we missing here? I think it'd be interesting if we have that world tree, that sort of big organic landmark, on one pole of Pilot, and on the other pole, instead of sort of an Arctic area, we have this big fiery wasteland, like the opposite of what one would expect from a world tree or a beacon of life, just someplace that is incredibly difficult for life to inhabit. It's basically a planetary representation of what would happen if that world tree were to experience an accident.
I like it.
Yeah.
So a polar deathland in essence. Let's go ahead and pass that around to Fletch. What you got?
Since we haven't touched on these yet, climate-wise, a bit steeper of a tilt than we have here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Closer to, say, 40 degrees.
Celsius or Fahrenheit?
No, the actual like rotational tilt
Ah, okay.
to determine where the bands are. So, this way, one of the continents is more likely to have no part of it in the tropical bandwidth or tropical banding. I would draw it and show it, but we don't have a note thing here.
I might have to work on that for next time, but give kind of an idea for people who aren't
Okay, so,
experienced with the idea.
All right, so as right now, our own planet has a tilt to it as it rotates. It determines where the the tropics is, where the warmest section is.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of and we have quite a few nations that are on one side or the other, but to have 2 large continents and one of them not having any part of it in that tropical banding area puts it basically like the Russian bloc section of Asia. They're going to have far more temperate to cold climate and far less of the warm to tropical that the other continent will experience in the middle of it.
So there's a big chunk of it that's likely going to stay closer to the same temperatures rather than moving through seasons as we know them in the US?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And whether that ends up being towards the world tree or towards the fire race, it probably end up being more towards the fiery waste at that point. Then, since we're having the inclement hell, if you will, being on one side, so the worst weather is gonna be down there. So that's obviously gonna be in the southern section, if you will, of the world.
Okay. Yeah. Can definitely see some interesting stuff happening with that. All right. Anything else? Or are we rolling that down to Severs?
Send it to Severs.
All right.
All right. Well, let's introduce some conflict. Um, I I am going to have to shamelessly grab from MMOs for this one, but the two large continents are hostile to one another. They don't just know one another, but um, the nations of them are disparate.
Okay. All right. So let's go over what we have so far at the planetary scale, though. We've got 3 continents, 2 large, 1 small, an island chain between one of the large continents and the small one. We've got a giant world tree sort of thing. It's not necessarily a tree, but it's probably organic. It's very important. And if it were ever destroyed, the whole planet probably goes kaput. Opposite that, on the planet, we've got a fiery deathland, kind of polar. Instead of an Arctic, it's all fire, always very, very difficult, if not impossible, for things to live there naturally. We've got a steeper tilt than Earth so far as rotational. So one continent, one of the larger continents, is likely to have no part of it in tropical banding. That part of it's probably closer to the fiery waste, so it's probably a lot hotter year-round rather than moving through seasons as they're known in the US or a lot of other parts of the world. And the 2 large continents are hostile to each other. They're desperate for some reason. So that covers our planetary scale sweep number 1. So far, honestly, I don't feel like the world is unbalanced in any degree. It's definitely got a lot going on. It feels like there's a lot of opportunity in the middle that it's created. There's very clear balances. It's very halved, other than that small continent in the island chain. We've got something, very living, very alive, very necessary on the top, something very dead, very anti-life on the bottom. We've got 2 continents that are going against each other. We've got the small continent that wants no part of it. And we've got that interesting little part on one of the continents where temperature is very interesting. Climate is very interesting. So let's bring this down 1 scale. We will zoom in from the planetary scale to the continental scale proper. So let's say we'll do 3 rounds this time. That way we have enough time to kind of go over each of the continents, maybe where the world tree is located, maybe the Deathland. Each of us will still only have 1 turn and only 1 particular idea per turn. So far, we've kept it pretty within reason. We don't want to go off on an entire monologue, but you're free to expand the ideas to some degree. I'm pretty sure we can all reasonably judge what is within the scale of an idea. So, let's start with Fletch this time.
The continent that is not in the bad zone shift, we'll start there.
Okay.
It is a coalition of kingdoms.
Let's see. Normal.
So not only is there the potential of war with the other continent, but with having to deal with allies who could easily become enemies at any given point, extra tension there.
Okay.
Also, again, stealing from an MMO.
Absolute
Things.
robbery. All right. Severs.
I think I'll stick to the same continent. I may just rotate through the three for the 3 rounds. But I think one interesting thing would be a means of connecting them, and this is kind of pushing up the edge of fantasy, but there being a transportation system in the form of like a transcontinental railroad, um, specifically for trains that are operated through magical means. That goes throughout the continent.
So just one continent?
Yes.
Okay, and that's on the normal continent or the bandit continent?
I believe it was the normal one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll say
that's
the
where we
normal
started.
one.
All right. Cool. Let's see. I think I'm going to take a trip over to the bandit continent. And I'm gonna give us a nice little bit of history here and say that the reason this continental war started is because whatever group of races or cultures that were on the banded continent, part of them got forced to live in that one really hot, humid, burning part of the continent. They just could not find that livable, and so they moved across, and that's where the origin of this conflict started. Just nice little usual oppression.
Makes sense.
That's how this all kicked off, and that makes that fiery area contested, conflicted historically. So we'll say burning area on banded continent. Just temporary name. Feel free to name areas as we go along, by the way. I think that covers that. So far in this round, we have the normal continent, where it is a coalition of kingdoms. It is a group of allies, presumably put together by the cause, that could turn on each other at any time. We have also on that continent a transcontinental magical railroad. That is how goods are shipped and people move around on that continent. And on the other continent, we have the source of the conflict between the two continents, where some group or groups of people, races, or cultures were forced into the harder to inhabit lands, and instead of staying there and dealing with the oppression, chose to head to the other continent, but that grudge has still lived on for the generations and the migration. I'd say we're starting to come together into something pretty interesting so far. Let's go ahead and take another round then. Fletch, you're up.
I'm gonna do the first yes, but in the bad zone
Mm-hmm.
on the tilted continent,
Mm-hmm.
there is only obviously growing things and whatnot isn't all that practical, but it does have one thing going for it:
Okay.
a material of some kind you can't find anywhere else, whether it be a magical metal or whatnot. Harvesting it is difficult, but it is there.
Okay. So now there's a reason to be there, but it's not a great place to live. It's wanted, but you don't want to be there. Okay. What you got for us, Severs?
I'm going to go with one that may seem a little obvious, but the small continent.
Okay.
Is not due to any sort of inclement climate or um, features, but due to opportunity, it's divided primarily into coastal regions because the people are primarily seafaring people throughout the continent. There, of course, is an inland area, and it's not abandoned, but most of the nations and whatnot that you'll find are going to be found at the edges of the continent.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. What can I do with this? What can I do with this that would be interesting? Let's talk a bit more about the tilted continent. I want to say that the tilted continent is primarily inhabited by a very adaptive, not quite human. They're definitely sort of scaled, but they're very human-like. They're not quite cold-blooded, but they are very sensitive to temperatures, and they are the primary inhabitants. They are the oppressors. They are the people that pushed other races, cultures, unwanted people into the Badlands area, because for them it is particularly uninhabitable. So that is at least one of the peoples that is primarily found on the continent. Let's see. Where does that leave us now?
We're on the third round of stage 2.
We are. And so far on the continental level, we have the non-tilted continent has a coalition of kingdoms that are not necessarily steadfast allies. We have a transcontinental magical railroad for transport of people and goods. On the tilted continent, we have an area that is very, very heat inclined, that does not support life super well, and was the source of the conflict between the two major continents due to migrational shovings. And the primary people on that continent are scaled but humanoid figures. Very, very human, but scaled, semi-reptilian, reptilian enough that that hot area was not someplace they could even consider living comfortably. So they shoved all the people they didn't want there, all the people and cultures they didn't want there. Those people migrated across. In that same area that is not super well looked upon, there is a material there that is very desired. Not a lot of farmland there, but that material is still worth it to have people there for. And on the small continent, we have that the continent is divided primarily into coastal regions so far as where people live. There's an inland section where people do exist, but primarily the large communities are along the coast due to their seafaring nature. Starting to come together, starting to get a picture of what we're dealing with here. Let's take one more round here. Fletch, you are starting.
All right. I'm gonna go over to the Ring of Fire section now.
Okay.
Usually when you have things like this, it happens either because of something natural or unnatural. I'm going with the unnatural this time.
Okay.
It is the remains and ruins of an old kingdom.
Okay.
The occupants here are obviously constructs of some kind, undeads, etc. It is the detritus of a once proud empire that may have once ruled this entire world. Who knows? But they fell apart so long ago and so abruptly.
Okay.
Maybe they were the cause of the blighted section on the other side of the world. Who knows? So it's both a place of mystery, danger, and adventure.
Sounds like a very mid-level area. Or it could be the final area, honestly.
Deeper in you go into the Ring of Fire, the more the more clues that lead to whatever it is that happened down the other pole. Could be. I believe this one here's a story starter, so others can finish it up.
All right, Severs, what you got for me?
All right. I haven't touched the tilted continent, so I will piggyback on that and give a little bit of a yes, but tied in with my idea.
Okay.
But it will be that at least on this continent, dragons exist, and at one point in history, ancestral dragons were somewhat related to the primary peoples of the land.
Okay.
So somehow there's quote the blood of dragons in these reptilian peoples.
Okay. Cool. Something sporty going on here. Okay. Let's see. What am I gonna do? I've spent a lot of time on the tilted continent. I think I'd like to move away from there. What do I want to do? I feel like... I feel like the world tree type figure needs a bit of expanding. Because we might not touch that as much as we start to scope in. Doesn't seem to have much going on. I don't think I want to bring divinities into this until we hit either a very small scale in how they relate to the people that are worshipping them or maligning them, or the actual planetary scale where they exist and did things. I think what I will do is... The world tree is a very common concept. It's a very well troped out concept traditionally. I think I want to play around with that a little bit. We have an idea, a better idea, I want to say, of what the fiery polar lands are like. What I want to do with the world tree like figure is I want to make it a sort of Tower of Babel-esque figure. It doesn't have much actual land around it, which is why it's not well known, it's not well accessed, it's hard for people to live there because there's just not enough room to live there naturally. Anything that lives there is bound to be very, very odd. But the reason for that is the tree itself is less of a tree and more of a spire made entirely of very magmatic metal, very hot, constantly shifting metal. You can find almost any metal on the planet there if you're able to stay there long enough and look long enough. Even some metals that would be found nowhere else. It is essentially a place that speaks the language of the minerals and materials of the planet. The heart of the planet can be seen there, the very core, without it being exposed. So instead of a tree, it's more of a sort of a living metal spire.
Nice.
I like it. Good spin on it. So basically an earth elemental aligned area, if you will.
Very much, though if you were to run into an earth elemental there, it would have a lot of interesting magical qualities or metals to it, probably, that would make it uniquely difficult to challenge.
Nice.
Okay, so let's talk about what we've got in total. So we went from 3 continents, 2 large, 1 small, a set of island chains, a ring of fire between one of the large continents, one of the small continents. We had a world tree-like figure that's very important. It's semi-organic at bare minimum, and would be catastrophic if it were to be destroyed. We have a polar fiery deathland opposite that on the planet. The climate for the planet has a steeper tilt than Earth, so we have a continent that is likely to have a part of it with no tropical banding. It's probably very hot since it's closer to the fire polar. We have continental conflict, where the 2 large continents are hostile to each other in a very desperate manner. And then we brought that down. On the normal continent, we have a coalition of kingdoms that are allies tenuously. They also have a transcontinental magical railroad. On the tilted continent, the banded continent, in that banded area that is difficult to live in due to the hotter climates, there is a material that you cannot find almost anywhere else on the planet. It's difficult to harvest there, but that material is extremely valuable. We also have the semi-reptilian people on the banded continent, descended from the dragons that exist, that have been there for a long time. And they are sensitive to temperature, and it is their doing that forced a lot of cultures and other races into the Badlands area of the tilted continent that caused a continental migration that left a grudge that sparked the conflict. We have the small continent, which is divided into coastal regions, primarily a seafaring people. There's an inland area, but you will find far more people at the edges of that continent. And we have the island chain between the small continent and one of the large continents, is the remains and ruins of an old kingdom. It's primarily occupied by constructs and undead. It's definitely an unnatural source. These islands were not made during tectonic shifts or whatever happened with the planet. They were created during something of artificial making, and are likely the remains of a proud ancient empire that collapsed suddenly, and possibly caused the polar badlands to become prominent or exist in the first place. And the last thing that we have is that the world tree on the other side is more of a world spire. So I guess we'll call it that for now. The world spire opposite of the polar deathlands is a towering figure with almost no livable terrain under or around it to really grasp onto. It's very difficult to survive there, but it is a molten mixture. It is a constantly shifting structure of all of the minerals and metals available that could possibly be on the planet. The heart of the planet itself connected to it, fueling all of that action, that exchange. Feels like we have a pretty robust world already, and we haven't even gotten down to the tiny little details. We haven't muddled around with the peoples too much or anything like that.
Pretty solid so far.
Doing pretty well here, doing pretty well.
I mean, we're touching on a lot of tropes, but then again, that's like one of the most important things about world building is to have enough tropes that people can see the familiarity in something new.
Tropes aren't necessarily a bad thing. Much like any other tool, what it comes down to is how you use it. Inverting a trope doesn't make it a good trope. Playing it straight doesn't make it a good trope. It's how you balance around the tool, how you use it. Let's see. So, we've done planetary scale, and we zoomed in. We did a continental scale. So from here, we're going to zoom in pretty broadly again, because from continental, you could easily say the last layer was multi-continental, and now we focus on one continent at a time. I think we'll take this at a bit more of a pace. Let's move this down to a country level. Again, you are free to go any continent, any particular country. You can also move to the polar or the world tree areas if you so please, but it has to be a swath of land that is fairly broad. A swath of, I don't want to say land because some of these areas don't really have livable land. A swath of area that is fairly broad, but not the size of a full-fledged continent. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
All right, cool. We will move the round robin order again. So we're going to start with Severs, move to me, and on Fletch. We will do another set of 3 rounds, I think.
Okay.
So country level.
Country level.
Mm-hmm.
I want to touch on kind of something familiar with fantasy, but also sort of switch it up a little bit.
Okay.
I think we should have a nation. We will say it's on the normal continent, and lacking in any real map or anything, I'll say it's on the northmost section. This nation, I will give the name of Estvan.
How do you spell that?
Estvan.
Okay, Estvan.
And this nation is primarily occupied by a long-lived race of peoples that we would call elves. But one slight inversion is that not all of their people are long-lived people. There is a subsection that has contracted some sort of curse, and so now they are living shorter lifespans, and this has created social shifts where the long-lived people basically live in aristocracy, and the short-lived people are seen as sort of expendable.
Okay. Okay, we got a dynamic going on there. An S-bomb. Nice, nice, nice. I'd like to add some more general structure. With the permission of the group here, I'd like to spend my turn kind of laying out the way, compass-wise, I'm kind of viewing the planet in my head. Is that okay with you guys? So we have a
Sure.
general idea of where things are located. If you were to view the planet as a flat circle, you would have the living spire at the very north of it. You would have the polar deathlands at the south. You would have the small continent, not quite all the way in the middle, closer to, I want to say, the middle, between the middle of the planet and the south. The island chain on the west, between the small continent and the normal continent, and the banded continent being on the east, with the banded area being on the south part of that continent. Does that sound okay to you guys?
Sounds good to me.
All right, cool. So let's get that down and make sure we have that laid out so we kind of know where everybody is. We can set up any kind of conflicts we need to based on geography that way. Or any allied stuff. So I think I've got that pretty well down. Fletch, what do you got for me?
I'm going to expand a bit more on other things in the setting, things that weren't attached to the continents. In this case, what's effectively a flotilla or caravan traveling the seas. Disenfranchised people, those who didn't dive into the worst part of the Badlands, or successfully make it to one of the continents, pushed off and driven away. Instead, now living a life of mercantile trade and ruin delving from the sea itself.
Okay. Okay. So that gives us another section of people to work with, but not really with land, kind of living on the seas.
It was something I felt was missing. Because all that ocean we have, gotta put it to use.
Okay. So, to cover this round, we have Esbon in the north of the western continent. It's occupied primarily by long-lived elf figures, elf-like figures. So far, their only real trait is that they are not actually all long-lived. There's a subsection of them that seems to contract not necessarily a sickness, but closer to a curse that causes them to live shorter lifespans. This curse, as it's propagated among their society, has caused social shift, where longer-lived elves that haven't necessarily contracted or can't contract this curse are considered, the royalty, the aristocrats, the big people in society. Whereas the cursed that live shorter lives are considered expendable because their lives are presumably shorter. My turn with a group vote was spent kind of laying out the broad world map where we have the northern living spire, the firelands in the south, the polar deathlands. The smaller continent, the island continent, is somewhere between the middle, the equator of the planet, and the polar deathlands, with their island chain being between them and the western normal continent. And the eastern continent is the banded continent with, as described, their badlands, their wastelands, their hot area with that valuable material, southern portion. Looking pretty good. Let's delve a little deeper. I got I got something going on here. I'm ready for this. Let's see what you got, Severs.
Okay. I'm going to probably seed another peoples into the world.
Okay.
Specifically on this small continent, and specifically on the inland section. Despite it being sparsely populated, it is populated by various monstrous races that, or semi-monstrous races that sort of work together against the outer sort of civilized races. Um, I consider them to be more tribal, to a degree more atavistic, and um, maybe even um, trying to think of how to describe it. Um, it would consist of various like common fantasy sapient monstrous races. So sort of what you would consider your classic fantasy goblins and gnolls and their offshoots.
Okay. All right. I see you. I see you. So I knew where I was going to take this the moment Severs said the word elves. I'm gonna go full hipster here today. So
Oh boy.
I'm not gonna touch Estfon, but their neighboring country on the western continent is named Gorstuk. That is Gorstukk. It is populated by what are referred to as orcs with a C. However, these orcs are not what you'd imagine from D&D. They are primarily some shade of gray-skinned, usually pretty lanky but muscular builds. They've got long, kind of gangly arms that are surprisingly strong. They've got reasonably portly bellies, as if that's just built into the race primarily. And they've got kind of very slightly boar-like faces. They don't have quite tusks or quite snouts, but it'd be easy to see and mock them by relating them to boars or pigs. And their primary trait as a race is that they are very attracted to farmland labor. They love working and cultivating grasses and farms, botanical areas, things like that. They have the strength to work the land, but their limbs are careful enough, their fingers dexterous enough that they can get into the soil and plant things as needed. They can work with interesting vines, and there is actually a very low end sect of them that specializes in very small portable bonsai like creations. So they are the neighbors to the elves. They're sometimes hired to, come in and work whatever farmland or forestry or botanical areas the elves are in with, and they get along pretty well. That said, there is some natural contestment with how easy it is for them to live in different environments. Especially the aristocratic sect from the elves doesn't particularly get along with the lowest end of the orcs, so they tend to malign and mock the small bonsai-like creations, so those aren't well seen compared to, I want to say, the huge, towering forestry that borders their country, not necessarily dominating the elven area, but definitely. So that is Gorstukk and Estfon. What do you got for me today, Fletch?
I'm looking up a word. Give me one moment.
For sure. I'm getting all of the orc stuff down in the notes because I definitely went in on that idea a little bit more than even I expected myself to.
In the Western continent,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to actually go through and hammer on race as well. This will be in the southern section of the Western continent, an area of broad, sweeping steppes. And I'm also going to go through and turn a traditional racial trope on its head.
Okay.
This is the land of the dwarves. Erkish. Erkish.
Okay.
This is where the nomadic tribes, the dwarves, dwell, coming together once a year to go through and dictate how the tribes will manage their going-ons and doings.
Okay.
Like the dwarves of D&D, who are, buried deep in the earth. Och, me axe, me beer. These are former warrior stoics, and prone to raiding other kingdoms. Part of that whole problem of the tensions are high. Because you never know when one little group of these are going to go rampaging past their borders into someone else's lands.
Okay. Do they always go rampaging borders, or is it something that spills out and they're normally rampaging against each other?
They'll raid anyone, each other, other kingdoms. You can hire them to raid your enemies if you want. It's been done.
Okay. Very, very bandit-esque. I'm gonna guess that a lot of the other living populations on the continent aren't super fans of them all the time.
When you're the one who's paying them to do your work, they're good enough. When they're the ones raiding your village, please stop.
Okay. Okay. So, let's see what we've got going on in this round. So far, at the national level, we've mostly been sitting on the western continent. On the very north of the western continent, we have Estfon, primarily occupied by elf-like figures. They don't currently have a name. They are not all long-lived. There's a big subsection that kind of divides the race, where some contract a curse that causes them to live shorter lives, and that has naturally created a social divide between the well-off, long-lived, and the expendable, short-lived. There was a turn spent to define the compass areas to figure out where everything was located, so the Great Living Spire of the north, the Polar Deathlands of the south, the island continent, the small continent just above that, the chain of islands between the west and southern, and the eastern bandit continent. There was also a flotilla, a caravan of the disenfranchised, those that didn't necessarily get on with society from one way or another, that didn't make it into society or just chose to not live in it, that live as merchants and delvers on the ocean. The small island continent now has a population of semi-monstrous races working together on the sparsely populated inland. They work together against the outer races. They're very tribal atavistic. They're stuff like goblins and gnolls and their offshoots. Back on the western continent, we have the country of Gorstuk, populated by, I'm going to call them the Orcus instead of the Orcs, actually. So, Orcus. They're very botanical, labor-hungry people that focus primarily on farming and plant life. They have very long, gangly limbs, dexterous digits. The lowest class can't, afford farmland or the like, or they just don't get access to it, so they focus on bonsai-like creations. And for the most part, the Orcus get along with the elven race of the north, save the high-end aristocratic elves tend to have an intense dislike of the low-class Orcus because of the way their bonsai, their delicately grown small creations, kind of they take it as a malignment against the great trees that border Gorstuck and Estfall. And down lower than that, we have on the western continent the broad sweeping steppes. Was the country or the dwarf race itself named Urkish?
Same.
Same thing?
Yep.
That's great, actually. So we have the Urkish of Urkish, a nomadic dwarven-like tribe, presumably short, stout figures, that come together annually to manage tribal happenings. They're usually pretty stoic, but they are prone to raiding other kingdoms and even each other. You never know when they'll go rampaging. You never know if they're rampaging your direction or someone else's. However, they are hireable when they're about their senses to raid particular places. Getting exciting here. So far, we've got what? 4 humanoid-esque races. And, you know, we've confirmed the existence of things like goblins and gnolls. Alright, we have one more national level round, then we'll be moving down to the city level round. So, kick us off, Severs.
Okay. Well, I almost feel bad to be throwing another race populating the world, but looking at it, I was looking at the Eastern continent, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the one that has the reptilian people with the draconic ancestor.
That is the dragon-blooded that we have, yes.
Okay. I felt like sort of defining and going into the background of the people that they displaced.
Okay.
The people that live in the southernmost regions. I feel like they should have a tie to the draconic peoples, but a reason that they were pushed out. And I've decided that they share a common draconic ancestor, but the people that were pushed out, the whatever dragon ancestor they had, um, basically sired them with a demonic ancestor.
Okay.
And so you've got these people, for the analog that I'm using, I'm thinking very similar to your classic tieflings, that are part demonic and part draconic. So they have generally various darkly colored skins, sometimes scarlets, sometimes violets, um, um, various different colors, but they will show traits of both their demon and their dragon ancestors. So it's not uncommon to find wings on them, or tails, or claws, um, slit eyes, um, stuff like that. And the main feature of these people is that they are highly adept, both through the sort of mystical nature of their bloodline and their social um, um, predilections, that they are sort of the magic users. They have innate magic ability. They study magic. They they are sort of the world's premier mages. Um, not that that has helped them in the sort of situation that they're in, but it gives them something that they can hold on to. And one of the reasons why they've been able to um, survive in sort of the region that they're in.
Okay. Not bad at all. Gives us a little more color there. So, I heard what Severus was doing, and I was really tempted to make, like, the sort of teacher's pet kind of race that didn't get oppressed on the Eastern continent. And then I thought about it, and I decided I'd take my hipsterism a little further. I'm going to head to the island continent. And I am going to do a little yes-butting myself. So, while the typical monstrous races of the inland and the coastal races of the outland, those cultures are clashing, they don't necessarily get along, I'm going to say they're not quite hostile. And the reason why is one particular race that originates on the inland there, the Kobolds. So here we're going to go with a more dog-like kobold rather than a lizard-like. Like, imagine little border collies. They're very short, they're very adorable, long, floppy ears, they're very eager, they, like, stumble over their words a lot, they're not particularly clever or dexterous, but they are friendly, and they have a unique charisma, and they are the runners between the coastal people and the inland people. They facilitate the trade. They kind of get along with everyone. In general, if you kick one or step on one while you're there, you're kind of looked on very poorly because they are everyone's friend unconditionally. No matter what you do, almost always you will have to do some very blood debt, my entire race now has to fight you for the rest of your being type stuff to really get on the bad side of Kobold. And that friendliness has allowed them to keep the southern continent mostly peaceful. Mind you, the coastal people still don't want to step into the inland. The inland people generally probably not going off the continent. It would take a special sort of situation for that to happen. But everything is much calmer there compared to the tension between the two continents, mostly in part due to the kobolds.
Nice.
Solid.
Alright, what do you got for me, Fletch?
I'll take us back up to the Western Kingdom real quick.
Okay.
Kingdom known as Chase. This is where the Magitech trains had their start. A city of steam and brass.
Sorry, what was it called?
Chase.
And you said a city or the country as a whole?
That's well, the country is basically a city at this point.
Okay.
Much like how New York is, well, a city, even though it's made of little cities built in within it.
Like, you kind of know that the state of New York exists. There are places outside of the city of New York, but it's New York, and you immediately think of... Yeah, okay, I get you. Okay, go on.
Steven Brass. Technology. Some people assume they're repurposing things that were found in lost areas. Others just assume they're madmen going through and risking the wrath of gods to seek some kind of power. A primarily human-dominated city as well.
Human as in the scaled humanoids, or just...
Human.
Okay.
We have yet to have insane pink fleshy things, so let's have some insane pink fleshy things.
Nothing against having something that is relatable. Okay. And that's
As a people, they're seen as a double-edged sword. They're needed to keep the trains going. They're needed to go through and produce the weird trinkets and technologies they sell. But, well, it takes an unstable mind to create these things. Even if they are fully sane, can you trust it?
Okay. Where on the continent would you say they're located? Next to the Badlands, further north?
The edge of the Badlands section.
Okay. It gives a lot of credence to their tinkering, especially because that's the only place you can find that one material, right?
Yep. Also the reason why their country is basically a city. You can't reach out too far and, well, you gotta build up, not out. So any growing they're doing is being assisted by that weird technology of theirs.
Okay. So, let's see what we've got for the nation level and our whole setting before we move on down. So, we started with 3 continents, 2 large, 1 small. An island chain, ring of fire-esque between one of the large continents, one of the small continents. We created a world tree-like figure with as a giant important organic landmark that would essentially cause the end of the world if it was undone. We have a polar fiery deathland opposite that on the planet scale. We have a steeper tilt to the planet so that there is a large band on one of the continents that does not shift temperatures and seasons quite as well, quite as easily as the rest of the planet. That was put closer to the polar fiery deathland that we made. And we started a continental conflict where the 2 large continents are hostile to each other in a desperate method. From there, we moved on down to the continental level, from the planetary level. We started the coalition of kingdoms on the western continent, allies tenuously. We have the transcontinental railroad, magical train, on the western continent as well. We also have the burning area on the banded continent as a source of the conflict between continents due to oppressed people being shoved there and migrating across, but maintaining that grudge. We have the bad zone on the tilted continent, has a material that you can't find anywhere else. It doesn't really support life or farming almost at all, but that one material is valuable, extremely valuable, difficult to get a hold of. On the smaller continent, the island-esque continent, we have that divided into coastal regions due to seafaring and otherwise migratory people. The inland area isn't abandoned, but most of the big civilizations are at the edges. And the tilted continent primary landfolk are scaled semi-reptilian people, sensitive to temperature, which helped cause the oppression that shoved people to the Badlands. We also had the island chain mentioned, where it was created due to an unnatural source, so it wasn't planetary movements, but something artificial. It is the ruins and remains of an old kingdom occupied by constructs and undead primarily, as the remains of a proud ancient empire, perhaps, that collapsed suddenly. That empire maybe even causing the fiery nature of the Deathlands. On the banded continent, we have confirmed the existence of dragons, ancient ancestral dragons, that sired the people of the land, primarily. currently over there. And we elaborated a bit more on our world tree-like figure, turning it into a living metal spire of infinite ores from the heart of the planet, constantly shifting metals and minerals that might only be found there, or stuff that could be found anywhere else on the planet. Sort of a tower of battle for that part of the planet's existence. A place tied to the heart of the planet. Very magical, but also very unlivable for most races. Then we moved down to the national level. And boy, we really went off there. So, we have our normal continent. Estefan is now a nation there, occupied by elf-like figures. Not all long-lived, due to some of them contracting or able to contract a curse that causes them to live shorter lifespans, which created a natural social divide. Most of the long-lived are aristocrats. Most of the cursed are expendable, treated as, chattel fodder. We expended a turn to kind of define things, lay out the world map to put the things on the scale. So we have our spire, our living spire in the north. We have our polar firelands in the south. We have the smaller island continent in the middle south, with the island chain between the south continent and the western continent. And the banded continent with the badlands is in the east. We also elaborated on a flotilla or caravan of disenfranchised cultures, peoples living on the sea. They didn't quite make it to the continents, or maybe they didn't want to go to the continents. They're living a life of mercantile trade and that way. On the small island continent, we have a sparsely populated area in the middle, but it is primarily laid out with its peoples primarily are semi-monstrous races working together against the outer civilized races. It's very tribal, atavistic, and mostly goblins, gnolls, those kind of fantasy races there. Over on the western continent, we have the nation of Gorstuck, bordering Estefan, where the elven-like figures live. We have the Orcus, who are the gray-skinned, botanical, farm-loving, labor-loving kind of people. They're very in tune with the flora. They're strong enough and dexterous enough that they love their work, and they're built for it naturally. The low class only get to care for small bonsai-like creations, and they get along with the elven-like figures over in Estefan for the most part, except for the highest bands of society in Estefan really don't like the very dregs of Gorstuck. It can be seen as a dislike for their creations, kind of a presumed mockery of the great trees at the border. And below that, we have, somewhere below that, I'm not sure if it's the southern border of the western continent or just below, but we have some broad sweeping steppes where the Urkish live in their country of Urkish, and they are relatively nomadic, primarily nomadic, one might say. They come together annually to manage these tribal happenings. They're very stoic folk. They are prone to fits of raiding, rampaging, where they can just tromp into each other's areas or even other nations. And you never know when it'll happen, you never know how it'll happen, but if you catch them in a not quite raiding mood, they can be coerced with goods and currency to raid someone of choice. And then over on the eastern continent, we took a look at the displaced people, the people moved out by the draconic-blooded humanoids. In the southernmost region, the Badlands, we have a similar, but also patently dissimilar race of tiefling-like people. They share a common draconic ancestor, however, this particular ancestor sired children with some kind of demonic ancestor, resulting in more tiefling-like folk. Part demonic, part draconic. Very darkly colored skins, prone to showing traits of both dragon and demon ancestors. Highly adept with magic due to bloodline and their own preferences. However, that's not helping them a lot with where they are forced to live. Back on the southern continent, we have the kobolds being brought up as small border collie-like creatures, very ultra-friendly, and they are the primary reason that it is safe to say that the coastal regions of the southern continent And the inland regions, there with their more monstrous-like folk, are not at war. They are the traders, the facilitators. They're everybody's friends and extremely hard to antagonize, but they're not particularly useful. Besides that, they're not too smart, not too good with their hands, just good at running about and making friends. And once again, over on the western continent, we have Chase. Oh no, sorry, this was the eastern continent, wasn't it? It was bordering the Badlands?
I don't think I said western, but you moved east, so I'm cool with that. Sorry, some popcorn in my mouth.
No problem. Just trying to keep everything in order here. We got a lot. This is going off.
Yeah.
Over on the eastern continent, bordering the Badlands, we have Chase, a country that is practically mostly known as one city, a city of steam and brass and technology. It's hard to say where they got all of this from. Some assume it's repurposed from areas lost to time and history, or maybe they're just madmen that defy the gods for power, but it is populated primarily by regular old humans, the old fleshy pink stuff, similar to the other races, but more baseline, more what we're used to here. They're very insane, and working with them is seen as risky, but they are necessary to handle the trains and produce technology and trinkets. It takes an unstable mind to do so, so they're pretty hard to trust. And they can't really go anywhere due to being trapped against the Badlands. I think it's actually somewhat interesting if we put that there, because then you have the how did the trains get from the eastern continent to the western continent? You know?
Well, they said transcontinental at one point for the first of those trains.
It was said as transcontinental. Do we want to keep that and say that the trains can traverse the ocean as well, or?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. That's a feat to have in your books. We made a train that bridges the continents. You fuckers can fight it out. We're gonna go back to making, I don't know, something that explodes.
Easy. Make a self-boiling teapot. There we go.
Self-boiling.
It has to grind
teapot.
the tea up too. Man, all right.
But when does it get to explode?
It's even exploding. We're to help the world, not. Oh, well, okay. So if you overpressure it this way,
I knew it. All right. So that'll take us out of the national level. We might not honestly need a second pass. If we do, I'd probably take it out really far. Like, I feel like we could, with what we have, when we go back out, we probably want to just go back to the planetary level and expand on that, because everywhere else is really blooming. Let's see. We just did national. We're going to go down to city, village, wilderness, and then we will round it off with planetary again. Let's see. So we're going to move back to the original order. I'm going to kick things off. And we're going to go down to the city level. So before we do that, I also, because cities are kind of inherent to nations, do we want to say that what we have for nations occupy the entirety of each continent? Are we good with that?
That's the sort of three nations on one side. Yeah, it kind of is three nations on the other.
Yeah.
And then
with the small continent, probably 3. With a larger continent, probably 5.
So maybe want to expand it out some more.
It's like the Hell continent. We can easily, chunk up 2 of the possible nation sections being lost to the Deathlands area.
That's fair.
But the other continent, we'll find like 2 more nations to make it pop.
Or we could say that the nomad tribes pretty much ate those areas as they grew. That also makes sense.
Yeah.
So the nomads could have a big swath of land in the south, maybe with some mountains between that make raiding the northern areas a bit harder, and that's why those two get along.
Work, yeah. That's solid.
Okay, cool. We will work with that. Let's see. City level stuff. Where do I want to go? Let's see. It's tough. There's so much now. Let's play around with... Let's play around with the flotilla. Because the flotilla's in an interesting place now that we have those trains going between continents. So let me get down what we've established in the group around here, which is about 3 nations per large continent. Magic railroads run between continents. Western continent. Mountains bordering Turkish territory. Man, getting to the western continent is sounding like more of a pain by the minute, because you've got to circumvent the island chain that's full of all the fucked up constructs and undead, and then you have to be kind of careful that you don't hit the mountains around Urkish territory, and you don't actually run into rampaging Urkish people. That's a mess. Alright, I definitely want to explain on the flotilla, though, because the flotilla is now in an interesting place. It wasn't mentioned that the seafaring, the sea-living people were kind of, raiders so far as other people. They're not very pirate-esque. They were mentioned as being more ruin delvers and merchants, I'm gonna dive down, find some loot, and come back up and sell it with the family or whatever. I'm gonna go ahead and say that the flotilla is not just a bunch of ships that are randomly drifting about, but there are actually fairly large armada type ships, except rather than built up, they're built very horizontally and sort of tied with very loose ropes. And this basically forms a city. It can be somewhat hard to find because it is somewhat moving on the sea, but that is where you go if you want to trade with them. We're going to call this city... Servot. Type that out. And on Servot, in this broad floating city of retired ships from the flotilla of the various navies and groups and clans that all generally get about, they mostly compete in their ruin delving. You can find pretty much any race in the world, even if slightly more rarely the more monstrous races from the southern continents. All of them joined by being outcasts, all of them now almost, but not quite, a meritocracy based on their ruin delving. Those that are too young or too old to delve for glory for their families or for themselves are found up top selling what their kin have brought back. However, it is strictly forbidden in Servot to ever mess with the magic railroads and their passengers. Doesn't matter what they're transporting, you don't touch them, you don't interact. Ships, you can, barter, you can call out to them. Some particularly fiendish folk might even try and their hand at piracy. However, even among the pirates, if you touch any of the magic rail cars, you are cast out of the outcast. You have nowhere to go because they don't want to deal with the goods that are on that being stolen or pilfered and any of the actual major superpowers from the continents coming after them. So they will sell you out quick as a match flick if you do that. But other than that, they are supremely tight and both family and accomplishment bound. Alright, Fletch? You stewing over there? You got something cooking?
We're still at city level rather than faith tiering. I'll stick with that one. Thinking of the various comps I have in my head. Give me a second here.
Sure. We got time. There's a lot to work with and think about now, and you can see the process kind of slows down, especially. You gotta really take your time to think about it sometimes.
On the southern continent.
Okay.
This is one thing we haven't really touched on yet. Well, we've touched on a race that are magical savants, but we haven't touched on a location where those types come together.
Okay.
Created by one who had gone north and seen the world tree, as it were, crafting a school in its image. The Iron Tower.
Iron Tower.
For those who wish to explore the arcane arts, may do so. It'll be on the southern continent. It'll be closer to the Ring of Fire, which would make people wonder whether it was already existent or it was created by him this way. Him, her, it. I use him as a generic term, much like dude.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be part of the ruins of the ancient kingdom, or if something was built in honor of the thing they saw up there. Honor or fear, who knows? But this is the place where those who wish to study magic go.
Okay. I have no further questions. Seems pretty locked up there.
I pass the baton over to my boy.
She bears.
All right. How about we give the Orcus a capital city?
Okay.
And instead of it being sort of central to their nation, it's closer to the borders so that it is sort of amongst that vast great woodlands area that you described, that was at their border with the elves. And this city actually acts almost as a metaphorical opposite to the idea of Chase, in that it is a city that is coexistent with nature. They, instead of clear cutting trees and whatnot, they've built their settlement amongst the trees. In fact, maybe even having multiple tiers where they go up into the trees. This means that city life for them is a bit more naturalistic, and it's a city that is generally one of sort of serenity and harmony. Not only do they have the close ties with nature, but this is where they can practice their like bonsai tree trimming to sort of zen themselves out and stuff like that. And you will even find some sort of woodland beings amongst the city's dwellers, to varying degrees. An example I had thought of, which may be a bit of a meme, but you have these floating fey-like creatures that exude light. We'll call them will-o-wisps, and in this city, they're known for capturing the will-o-wisps and putting them in jars and using those jars as lanterns.
I'm not going to name names here, but someone's going to listen to this, you realize. This is going to happen.
I realize.
This man is out here trying to get himself into trouble. Alright. So.
What? Nah, never. Our boy would never do that.
Why would Severs ever do something criminal like? Would that ever happen? I can't see it. Not my eye.
And
He'd never poke a murder bot with a stick.
And I'm gonna go ahead and say the name for the city is Aaron Finn.
Okay, Aaron Finn. Alrighty. So that wraps up this round. We did go ahead and take a united vote here. At the start, we have 3 nations per large continent. We agreed that magic railroads run between the continents. The western continent has mountains bordering Turkish territory. We did go ahead and make Servant for the flotilla type folk. It is a merit/filiocracy based on ocean and ruin delving. Old and young folk there tend to act as merchants, with the glory seekers ruin delving to help feed their families. There is a very stout agreement amongst all the people of Servant not to ever touch the magic cars or railroads. There is some minor piracy going on, however. You're able to find just about any race in the world there, though some may be in less quantities than others for obvious reasons, like being more monstrous and finding it harder to travel or so on. But generally, you will be able to find any one type of race there. It is a city of floating ropes and ships, with retired ships and super broad level armada ships doing the primary structuring of the city, with ropes running between them. And the city does drift, so if you're coming out there to look for them to trade or to become a delver yourself, it does require a bit of know-how on the ocean. On the southern continent, we have a place where magicians come together, a place to learn the arcane arts, to come and master and explore the depths of magic, the Iron Tower. It is unknown if it was created by its head, or if it was simply, by its virtue of its location, someplace that is also a part of the ruins of an ancient and powerful kingdom. Very close to the Ring of Fire-styled islands, and thusly, it is a place cloaked in its own unique mystery as well. And then we have the capital city of the Orcus, Fen, created closer to the border, the great, huge trees and the massive woodlands that Esteban and, boy, what did I call this? Gorstuck. It's very close to their border, the lands they share. And it is a metaphorical opposite to the city-country case. It is not mechanical, but natural in nature, very in tune with the trees and land. They're a very calm, relaxed city life. There's a lot of serenity and harmony, a lot of kind of natural events, some bonsai tree trimming, and lots of natural woodland creatures can be found here of both magical and non-magical nature, including things like will-o-wisps, which are used as a regular light source in Erenfell. Alright, so we've got a pretty good groove going on here, I'd say. We've got a couple real interesting places that I'd say you could find places similar to them in other settings, but they definitely feel like, to me, they have their own unique flavor. So, that is round 1 of the city level. We have 2 more rounds of this. We're going to take 2 rounds total of the village level after. We're going to take 1 round of wilderness level. Then we'll take it back for another round of planetary, and then that will be our setting created. So, where are we making our next city? Let's take some time to think about it. We'll go ahead and have a quick break here. So if anybody needs to go out and get a bite to eat, all that jazz, we'll take a break. Welcome back, Seabear.
Thank you. Me and my dogs appreciate it.
All right. Everybody good to go? Everybody ready?
Yep.
All right. Let us delve into the second city level round. What are we doing? So we have the capital for the Orcus. We have Chase, which kind of did double duty over on the eastern continent. We have... what's left? The Badlands, we have the Dragonfolk. We can do some damage down south. And we can, of course, add city-like features in other places. What do I want to do here? I think... well, it's the first thing that stuck out of my head, so I'm going to go with it. We're going to head over to the eastern continent. We're going to push it up north with the Dragonfolk. What am I going to call these people? Because they can't live without a name forever. Let's call them the Morvis. So that will be our dragon-like race up north on the eastern continent. They are pretty prideful people. You could arguably say they have a lineal descent, kind of like from the Mongolian Khan kind of idea, where they were conquerors, they pushed across the lands, they made it their own, and that's where all the shoving people kind of came from, all of the oppression. And they stabilized around, I want to say, an area of just plains, really. Not too much features, bordering some mountains, but mostly featureless, because what the Morvis like to do is they like to build more caverns. You'll find a lot of hills and caverns rather than outright structures, because with their natural talents and physiology, they find that it makes it easier to control temperature there, to create what is more habitable to themselves there. And mind, this is off just purely folklore hearsay of kind of Mongolian Genghis Khan type deal. So that's where that comes from, and then we're moving into more of a strange, like, mole-like dragon feel, where their big city is going to be called, let's say, Corvus, actually.
Yeah, so two groups based off of the Mongols. Not bad.
Hey, what is chaos but creating 2 of the same people, putting them in the same room, and seeing what they do?
Exactly. I like it.
So, Corvus is notable from a distance as being like you get off a boat and you notice not quite a mountain, but a huge hill in the distance. It's just seemingly a huge featureless hill. It's grassy, it's a little bit idyllic. And only when you come closer do you notice it's almost sort of built into a basin. It's this huge mound in a basin. And surrounding the outer curve of the basin, there are holes, just innumerable holes with smooth rock slopes built between them that the people travel on. All of the main governmental areas, all of the big structures like the major academy and their little museum-like place are built in that giant hill in the middle. And the further down you go, the more likely that you're running into the more important people. So all of the ruler type people, all of the aristocracy, the high-end society is down at the bottom. And the further up you go, the closer to the edges and the outside are the more slum-like areas. So getting in can sometimes be trouble paired with the Morvis's natural pride and the way they hold themselves up regardless of their status in their own society. But as you get down, you'll find a lot of mixed culture, a lot of trophies that have been built out into ideas, stolen spices years ago cultivated and brought into a powerful food culture with an emphasis on staying comfortable by exerting power. So that is what the Morvis do in Corvus. They flex on each other. They group up and flex on anyone coming in. They barter rather sharply. Like, it's a very mixed bag if you barter with the Morvis. You're either going to get absolutely railed and robbed, or they'll exert their pride by paying a lot for whatever you're offering. And what they've traded for over the centuries and so on has a lot to do with the mixed bubbling pot of their culture, which you'll see in, like, for example, down the slopes, you'll have occasionally a built-out little platform of rock that'll have a little food stand on it. But as you get to the bottom, you'll come closer and closer. You'll find more of these rock platforms spread out almost like a disc, and just lines on lines of stalls with tantalizing smells that might remind you of home or be something completely new. If you want to eat, the first place anyone that knows about the world will tell you to go is Morphs. It is ruled by council rule, where the council has various aspects. There's a seat for a set of the best working merchants in the city, the people with the most repute as merchants, the people who've made the most profits. There's a seat of warriors. There's a seat of people who specialize entirely in being councilmen that advise these other branches, and they work between themselves to decide how the city's going to run, who gets to run what stalls where, who has to sometimes, give up their territory, or recognizing achievements all comes from this council. It's usually no more than 20, 30 people at a time. I think that about covers it. I think that's provided a pretty good idea of what's going on in Morphus.
I'm not gonna lie, the idea of a kingdom that where the definition of power is who's the comfiest. That's
Strength is being comfy, and comfy comes from being strong.
it's a whole mood.
If you welcome a guest in Morvis and they don't have the second comfiest seat in the house, then there's a problem. Because it means either you're treating your guest badly, or you're disrespecting your guests somewhat intentionally.
You're too poor and can't afford the comfy seats.
Like, you could see one of the councilmen inviting a new councilman in who's about to rise to power, and he gets the comfiest seat in the house. He gets served first explicitly. Because then you're kowtowing. That's explicitly kowtowing. It's very obvious brown nosing, but it's not looked down upon because that's how things are supposed to work in Morpheus. All right, I think that about settles that idea. Was Morpheus the race name or the city name? I've forgotten by now. This is what I get for naming them so similarly.
The Morvis from Corvus.
Okay. I've done this to myself because I do all of my sections without noting it down. During everybody else's sections, I'm writing to keep track of it. But during mine, I'm just freeballing it, and so I have to go back and say, what did I say? Did I do that? Was that me? Alright, Fletch, you still brewing?
Alright, so let's go ahead and take a nice little thing of this one myself. So in the mountains that separate the dwarves from everyone else, we're gonna go ahead and put in the mining and smithing race and community.
Okay, so that is over in Turkish, right?
Yes.
Alright. Turkish
So
mining community.
they are the Kobold. This is your more traditional lizard-like lizard-like race.
Okay.
Their names is just similar enough that most people refer to them as kobolds. At least those up here. So they're shocked when they see other types of kobolds, or people from down south don't believe these things are real kobolds.
Okay.
They're a small community, living in the mountains themselves, doing the mining, smithing, and whatnot thing that typically, dwarves would do. This race does instead. If you will, these are the my beer group.
Oh gosh, drunk lizards. I'm gonna have to see if there's like somehow a video of drunk lizards on YouTube or something later. So we got small lizard-like folks living in the mountains of Turkish. Kobal, spelled Khobal, easily mixed up with the kobolds. Okay. We got anything else we want to drop on that?
That's pretty much it right now.
Okay. Cool.
I mean, I guess actually, these are the smiths that tend to provide to the dwarves below.
Okay. So they provide stuff like not just weaponry presumably?
Weaponry, armor, the metal goods they need. The kobold trade the metal items that the dwarves would need for the foodstuffs they can't grow themselves.
Okay, so they're like synergistic with the Urkish.
Okay. Does that put them off limits for rating typically, or is it just still free for all?
These are the ones giving doing the weapon trade and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
That would definitely go through and cause a few other of the tribes to go and, well, turn on you. Because, hey, you just ruined all of our chances of getting weapons this season. Good going, idiot.
Unfortunate. Well, at least they probably keep something to arm themselves. How well that goes for them, who can say?
Even if sometimes all it is just going through and slamming the gates and praying they can't get in.
Poor kobolds. All right, what you got for me, sea bears?
I'm going to break from the standard continents and say I have a city that is actually rather close to the southern pole.
Okay.
The fiery hellscape that's down there, at the very edge of it, there is the city of Last Stop, which is quite on the nose in its naming. Okay, because it is the last stop before you reach the hellscape. And it is a city where crime is king. It started out as sort of a penal colony for the other continents, and they sort of abandoned the criminals to their own. And so this is the place where even people that are exiled from the flotilla will find themselves. It's not a great place to be. It's basically almost a city-sized favela, but amongst the shacks and ramshackle sort of structures, they are barely eking out a survival. Um, Even though it is a sort of harsh and brutal place, they do sort of operate on sort of a thieves' code, where you have um, different sections of the city are sort of self-governing by whatever gang is strongest enough to hold the territory at the time. Yeah.
So is it mostly water based, but kind of attached to the pole's surface?
Um, I'd say it's about 50-50.
Okay. And then my follow up to that would be, how do they survive, like, resource wise?
Um, well, I imagine a lot of it would be through the part that it is sea based. They sort of operate as kind of a pirate's haven, whereas the flotilla was very much about trade and um, you know keeping your hands off certain things. These guys are the lifeblood of the city, and so it's sort of whatever they can get their hands on is fair game.
Okay, okay. I was afraid I was gonna have to make Australia jokes at first. I think the sad part about my notes right now is that I've got a solid paragraph for each of what both of you said, and mine is just a single line. Uh, Let me flesh this out from what I remember. We're down and more central. The higher held in regard the area is massive street food community slash economy slash reputation. Okay. That is most of what I remember about Corvus. That's all laid out. Okay. So, on the national level, we have one more round to go. So far, we have agreed there are 3 nations per large continent. Magic railroads run between continents. Western continent mountains are bordering Urkish territory. Help keep them a little bit under control. We have Servat, the merit/philocracy on the ocean from the flotilla, with the ruin delvers, the glory seekers, the merchants, and the definitely don't touch the fucking magic railroads. We have the southern continent, where we have the Iron Tower, the place for the arcane arts, your big wizard tower / academy that might have been built on the ruins of that fallen empire, might have been made by the leader, who is still keeping this all a big old mystery. We have the Orcus capital city, Erin Fen, built close to their border with the elves, where it acts as an opposite to the city-country chase. It's very naturalistic, good relations with the woodland beings, the fae, all of that jazz happening there. We've got the Morvis living in Corvus, the dragon people on the eastern continent, who have come back from all of their raiding and all of their oppression over the years and have created a vast, bubbling, shared pot of culture from it that focuses a lot on food and comfort while still basing a lot of their relations on power and power dynamics. They like to live in hills and in the earth. They dig out their homes rather than building structures and then layer onto that with other techniques and magics to form a very comfortable life for themselves. A very prideful people, they do. We have over in Urkish, not the Urkish people themselves, but the country of Urkish, we have a set of mining communities run by the Kobold, who are easily mixed up with the Kobolds of the southern continent, much to many a chagrin for people with bad tongues and bad memories. They typically live in the mountains. They do a lot of smithing, a lot of drinking, and they provide to the Urkish with weapons, armor, metal goods, all that jazz. And they trade for the food they can't grow in the mountains. However, they are still definitely targets of Urkish raids, depending on what goes on that season. And then closer to the southern Deathlands, at the edge of that terrible hellscape bowl, we have Last Stop, a crime city. Started as a penal colony, criminals from all walks of life can find themselves here if they were outcast for whatever they've done. Among the shacks, the ramshackle, the half on sea, half on a terrible molten land life, they barely eke it out, mostly relying on piracy as the primary method of obtaining goods and other sources of life. They tend to operate on more of a thieves' code between gangs governing areas. Whoever's in charge might have their own rules that differ area by area. It's a rough place on a rougher location. Not bad, I want to say. Not bad at all. Alright, one more round. We've still got a good couple of places to fill out on the map. We've got options. I want to take a leap into something a bit higher end. I want to say that in the heart of the polar Deathlands, there's a place that almost no one anywhere else knows about by virtue of where it is located. It is not on ground level. It is above ground level, hidden in the murk, the ash, the dark skies of the Deathlands, which I'm going to leave unnamed for now. I can't find a good name in my head for them. But the closest thing so far in this setting to the divine would be these beings. They're not quite fire elementals. They're not quite angels. They're creatures born from the magic and heat stewing in the heart of the planet of Pilot that is boiled out and taken form. They've hidden themselves and are acting as cruel arbiters of the Deathlands, judging those who enter. Some are swept away, some are burned immediately, some are covered in molten slag, never to be seen again, and a very rare few are taken by these heretofore nameless beings to act as servants, to be trained, toyed with, changed. They are not quite the planet's will, but could be easily seen, if they were known about, as representations of Pilot's callousness. As a planet would see something living on it on the scale of an ant, so too do these. I'm going to call them Arthbus, Arthbus. So too do the Arthbus see things that they encounter. Almost all life to them is insignificant, and they have the magical backing to impose their will on these things. Thankfully, because of said views, they have no real interest, for the most part, in what happens around the world. It's a very secular society in the clouds, and they are also part of the reason why sometimes it simply rains fire and death on the pole. If you were to get close enough somehow, without dying, without being taken by them, what it would seem like is that someone or something had somehow created a sun in the black clouds of the Deathlands that was closer and hotter than the sun ever had a right to be. Bring your sunscreen, kids. Their locale doesn't have a name that they bother sharing with anyone. They don't even name it themselves. However, interestingly enough, the name for their kind that they seem to share as a name was just something they have. It's just known. It is a fact of life for them. All right, Fletch, what you got cooking for me?
I'm gonna take things straight up to the top now. Back of the tower.
Okay.
The entire reason for its morphic nature and constantly shifting materials is because of what's trapped in there. The only way to ensure something can never break out is to make sure the material between it and freedom is always fresh.
Okay.
The gateway to the lower planes is trapped in there.
Hmm. And by lower planes, we mean
If the hells, whatever, you know.
the
Whatever
bad
the equivalent is
place.
for the setting. Yes. Where you would think the road to hell would be down south. No, it's up north.
Hmm. Interesting, interesting.
Since nobody touched on why you don't want to break it, I feel like, you know.
Reasonable, notable. Let's expand a little more on that, though, to give it more of a city-like structure feeling. Kind of give me an idea of what we would find moving around there because of that. What are
If
some
you
moving
were
pieces?
to actually breach the wall and get in, you would find yourself on the chaotic plane that is the underworld. This was once the steps that they took to raid the world from, before they were sealed away. in that tower, gazing down into the chaotic abyss, is the empires that live within this section. The demonic and infernal kingdoms, the darkness of the void, etc.
Okay.
All of them are just waiting and hoping for a chance to be able to breach back into our world again.
Okay. I see it. I see it. You know, now that I think about it, there's definitely not a lot of cold in this setting, huh?
Not really. I mean,
Winter vacations
probably
must be
closer north.
high value.
Yeah.
All right, bears. Tell me what you got.
Okay. Well, I don't have a city, but something on city scale.
Okay.
So I'm thinking on the eastern continent.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's the one that housed Chase and Corvus and the Badlands, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'm imagining that somewhere fairly central to the continent, maybe edging more towards the Badlands side, um, there is something there that is a threat to everybody, and that's one of the reasons why things on this continent have a tenuous alliance, and that there is a monster den, and this den houses a large, nigh invincible monster. Maybe it's a giant dinosaur, maybe it's a kaiju, maybe it's your prototypical Jurassic type monster. But for whatever reason, there's a dormant monster and its den, um, settled, um, roughly equidistant from the Badlands and these other settlements, so that it could potentially threaten any of them. People know where it is, but basically don't disturb it for lack of disturbing it. They are satisfied with it being dormant, and um, people building up these once in a generation heroes to go after it whenever it does wake. But for many years at a time, it doesn't. It sleep.
Oh boy. Well, there's our Nixia, I guess. No, I want to say it's spookier than that. It feels spookier than that. I mean, like, the first idea I had was definitely a sort of an Onyxia's Den type thing, but the threat inside of it is definitely different from that. It's a different scale and span.
Yeah.
Not bad, not bad. Oh boy. I'm gonna save the full review for when we get to the end, because we're pretty close to wrapping things up. So I'm not gonna go over everything again. I will cover national level stuff again. So let's see what we got here. We have 3 nations per large continent, magic railroads between continents, western continent mountains bordering Urkish territory. We have Servat, the ocean city, with its glory delvers, its merit/filialocracy, their absolute non-desire to get involved with the continental societies, for the most part, save some minor piracy, and their city of ships and sea detritus. We have the southern continent, with its iron tower, for those savoring the arcane arts, wishing to explore and peruse magic greater, close to the Ring of Fire, wrapped in the mystery of the fallen empire. We have the Orcus capital city, Erin Fen, a naturalistic haven built on, with, and around the massive trees bordering the two societies on the northern end of the western continent, with plenty going on, very friendly with the woodland and the life, natural or otherwise, there. We have the Morvis living in Corvus and their giant hill in a basin city, all of their mixed cultures coming together to form a society built on power from comfort and comfort from power, with a thriving food community. The further down you go, the more you can find of the richer pleasures in life for the taste buds, and I want to say a fairly popular spot to go, if you're willing to brave it. We have the Urkish mining communities of the Kobold, the small lizard-like people easily confused with actual kobolds by name. They live in the mountains, they mine, they smith, they drink, and they sell to the Urkish while trying not to get stomped on by them. Down south, deep near the terrible horrors of the flaming polar deathlands, we have a last stop, the crime city, where you throw people that just weren't wanted anywhere else. A place rife with criminal activity, with turf wars, with gangs and pirates, and just the hardest living you can imagine for society on the planet of Pilot. It's hard to survive there, it's hard to get by there, it's hard to get there, and frankly, if you can help it, nobody really wants to be there. But you get what you get in life sometimes. Deeper in the Deathlands, we have the Arthvas, their nameless pseudo-city society in the clouds of the polar Deathlands, beings born from the heart of the planet, ever judging, ever judgmental, cruel arbiters of a higher echelon than most beings. They remain in the clouds there, they kill those found unworthy and toy with those found interesting. They rain fire, death, and judgment. And that's if you know about them and survived. Over in the deep north, we have the Iron Spire, the would-be world tree, the towering thing that is the only structure between Pilot and a terrible fate, because deep in its heart, between all of the shifting molten metals and minerals, the magical wonders of existence found in the constantly almost self-perpetuating tower, we have the portal to the lower realms, the worst places imagined, the truth of every hell imaginable in culture. Down there in the depths of the tower, trapped for hopefully forever for most of the people alive on Pilot, are everything demonic, infernal, the darkness of the void, all of the truly worst stuff on a scale above people, waiting for their time to end the world. And back on the eastern continent, towards the Badlands, but really more central to the continent, roughly equidistant from everything major on the eastern continent, there is a den filled with only one thing, but full it is, a creature that has never been slain, that maybe never can be slain, can only be put back to sleep every time it awakens, a being that wreaks havoc and terror whenever it arises, the goal, the dream, the story told by and of heroes of every generation. Oh, buddy. So now we gotta move this all the way down the list again. Now we are moving on to the village level. We're gonna have 2 rounds of this, and this is mostly how general folk live. It's the small scattered areas between these major highlights. It's, you know, the lowlands. It's average life. It's where your usual adventurer, where a hero's tale might start, from humble beginnings type deals. Again, you can put this anywhere on the surface, under, or over the planet within reason. We're just trying to keep it very low end here. Like, for example, if you're running a very low level, staying low level campaign type idea. So, kicking us off this time is going to be Fletch, and we will go 2 round robin rounds. Then we will move to the wilderness level where we're just describing, you know, layouts, the way the land goes, more focusing on the in-betweens where the roads are located. Then we'll pull back out to the planet level for any last major decisions, and we'll call it setting.
Right.
Whenever you're
Guess
ready.
let's go ahead and head up to the Elven Kingdom.
Okay. Western continent, north near the Elves.
I've yet to think of a name for the place. This is one of the villages that gets raided the most by the dwarves.
Why did
Partly to not having any of the long-lived here, and partly due to it being part of the farming land.
okay?
When they have troops here ready to take on the raiders, they don't come. But when the Airkesh are on their way, area guard in sight. So either someone is going through and letting the Airkesh know, or it really just is a case of very bad luck. They're fortunate in the fact that the Airkesh tribe that raids them is far more inclined to just charge in, take stuff, and go. But it's still a thing that happens, and adventurers can easily cut their eye teeth here, going through and trying to defend.
Okay. So what intrigues me about that is being that pretty much the elves and the Urkish were implied to be on opposite ends of the continent. Does that mean this particular tribe tends to like just go up the side of the continent? They're very north of the Urkish territory. They slide up the side, snatch their stuff, and go back down. Okay. I think that's pretty well defined. There's a lot of pretty decent plot hooks there for a low-end adventure. I dig it.
And you'll have the chance, if this is something that that the party wants to try to figure out the truth of, well, then they can go and dig deeper into it. Maybe it is one of the more noble houses has decided that this place just needs reminding, for whatever reason, and they're the ones sending the Urkesh up there to do it.
Could be. Gotta love
Yeah,
us
it's
an
funny.
aristocratic conspiracy. All right, Severus, what you got for me?
I've got a village that's on the small continent. It's one of those coastal villages, and it is known as East Ivory Run. It is basically a village that um prides itself on being a service village. Um, we with a fair amount of trade as well. Um, this is a village of artisans, but also um, of the arts. So you'll often find that entertainers and bards and the like can eke out their living here. It's very much a place where they operate on tourism and sort of being an in between some of the larger cities. They're a nice stop in the road, but also a place where a potential adventurer who's probably more inclined to the mental side would find their start.
Okay. Love to see it. Gotta have some place to enjoy yourself. It's always got to be a bard house when they get kicked out for attending art college.
Yeah.
Let's see. What am I going to do here? Let's take it over to the Badlands. Our poor tiefling folk haven't really been much talked on. And there's probably good reason. It's probably going to be hard to find an actual proper city there. They're living it rough if they're still living it there at all. But right in, not quite the heart, but further south than that, further away from the madness of Chase, there was, or is, an attempt to begin building a city. It's ambitious, but it is home for some folks, and they want to take some pride in it. They want to build it up. They want to have some place that is a semblance of comfort in the Badlands. We'll call it... Ravmouth. Ravmouth is what you get when somebody has just enough pride, but isn't quite an idiot and lands in charge. Probably due to a bit of nepotism, but they think, despite everything going wrong, that they can make this work, that it's going to be the best. That's what this is built on. So, it is a conglomerate of magic, kind of magical works push this earth above the others, made it a little slope up, kind of tried to bring it above eye level so you could see it peeking over the horizon so they could kind of look down on people coming into the village. They're really propping themselves up. They want to be a city so badly. They want to be the place to be in the Badlands. But the honest truth is their population's roughly similar to the nomads and the other small life places dotting the Badlands. While it has a name, their efforts have borne some fruit. It's not necessarily the place you want to be. In the end, that swath of land is typically a place you want to be in and out of. But if you have to stay somewhere, there are definitely worse options than here, though not by much. The people tend to be a bit prideful. What crime there is made by greasing hands and thus is hard to pin down properly. It's not necessarily a slimy place, but you can see the people there are a bit full of themselves. However, there's a lot to do there because of that, between mining the materials that need to be, trying to establish the place as its own little powerhouse on the continent finally. The people that just want to get out but can't, maybe there's a bit of debt slavery there. There's definitely a lot to do. And despite all else, pushing themselves up doesn't seem to have helped. There are a couple of monster dens that encourage the decision to push the land up, but doing so hasn't really stopped monsters from being an issue there. So there's definitely some nasties that regularly need to be stomped out. Alrighty. So, round one, we ended up with the western continent. We have a nameless village north near the elves. It's probably near one side or the other of the continent, east or west. That is regularly raided by the Urkish. None of the long-lived stay there. It's not a big place where you'd expect to find a big name at all. Lots of farmland. They're not armed constantly, and in fact seem to be lowest on guards when they're getting raided by the Urkish. But fortunately, the tribe that does raid them tends to take and go rather than pillage. It's an okay place for adventurers to cut their teeth, acting as defenders. There's also some conspiracies that could be hunted out there if some might so please. On the small continent, we have a coastal village, East Erie Run, which prides itself on being a service village. There's a good amount of trade there. It's kind of between cities. Lots of artisans and people of the arts live there and eke out their living performing. It's very much a tourist village in between larger cities, and a pleasant road stop, as well as a good potential adventurers starter town. And then over in the Badlands of the East Continent, we have Ravmuth, a village that is a wannabe city, as it's best described. Primarily tiefling population, very full of themselves, where debt slavery is common, they're rife with it. They want to be, but they're not quite there. However, their efforts have not been completely a waste. It could be said that it has higher comfort than a lot of other parts of the Badlands, but ultimately it's still the Badlands, and it's still rife with its problems of climate, terrain, and monsters. A good reason to get out of town is being in town. So that'll cover round one of villages. We have one more round to add some real ground level stuff, and then we'll take it back out to the planetary level and call it a wrap.
All right. On the edge of Chase is Depot 45.
Oh boy.
This is one of the stops where the trains go to get the various hangers on and strange little creatures out of it. After all freight and passage have been removed, go through and send the boys to clean it out. Because let's be honest, while the rules on the sea say don't attack the train, doesn't mean you can't hitch a ride. And these things go between all the continents, so something could easily stumble on it or find its way on it. A good way for adventurers to go earn what is ostensibly easy coin. Unless it's something big. or nasty, deadly, or planned.
Are we gonna pull the classic? Is somebody just gonna slip a bomb in there and it's just gonna be a mess? Is that what we're doing today?
No, I was more considering, like, you know, one of the other the other continent's kingdoms going through and putting raiders of some kind on it.
Turns out that one of the tribes Verkish got drunk and all passed out in the train, and they're very confused and very angry. We're gonna need you to do something about that.
Or on the small continent, a bunch of more hostile creatures found their way on into the train.
Oh, buddy. Sounds like a good way to introduce spicy elements early on, get people intrigued in other parts of the world.
Yeah. And also, maybe the clean out goes routine, but the train starts moving before you get a chance to get off. Free transit fare?
Hey,
Where are we now?
we're getting the gotta chase, boys. Alright. Not bad, not bad, not bad. What you got for me, old Sevy boy?
Okay. I'm thinking, in the Elven lands, but close to the Orcus side of things. So I was tempted to put this in Orcus, but then I realized I sort of butted the capital up to the border. So on the Elven side of the border, there is the village of Sesame, and it is unique in that it is sort of a racial enclave. Um, it is primarily a pink fleshy human settlement, but amongst the people that live there, you will also find half elves and half orcs, um, or half orcas. My bad. Who may not have any other place in their normal societies.
Mm-hmm.
It is a see that just despite being composed of people from both lands, really seems sort of independent and on its own. To the point that it is sorry, a village that often faces regional sort of pressure from its elven owners because it is levied with higher taxes and um, higher tariffs and whatnot on trade goods, and so the people here um, they they sort of feel like they're stuck on their own, but they're still slightly being oppressed by people that they are quote related to.
I see, I see. What's some of the natural troubles one could find there? What are some good things that the ground level people have to dig their teeth into to survive?
The biggest threats actually come from probably their own neighbors. Um, they while they have sort of their own self-contained community, it's sort of one of those outside the walls of the village. You're sort of almost an outcast in your own. They face troubles with travels as far as banditry in the countryside, um, threats of I just had that thought completely leave my head as I was.
That's the worst when you're like right on in the middle of like a structure and it just vanishes from right between your ears.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. It's primarily a place that, story wise, there's going to be, opportunities because they're going to need adventurers to sort of secure their connections to the outside world. They can't, for example, travel as freely because the people of the surrounding countryside will exploit them. So they're going to need things like caravan escorts, city guards, um, people that are going to basically come help them maintain their semi-independence.
Okay, okay. Let's see what we got going on here. All right. So, for our village level round, we ended up with a nameless village in the north near the elves in the western continent, regularly raided by the Erkish. Lots of farmland, they're not armed constantly, and seem to be the lowest on hands when they're being raided. The tribe that raids them, fortunately, tends to just steal rather than pillage, and adventurers are free to cut their teeth there as vendors. On the small island continent, there's the coastal village of East Eyrie Run that prides itself on being a surface village with a fair amount of trade. Lots of artisans and artsy people in general, entertainers and bards, good for making a living there. It's a tourist village between larger cities and a pleasant road stop, but a good starter town. We have Old Ravmouth in the Badlands, a city of primarily, or rather a village of primarily tieflings, that are very full of themselves in a way that encourages stuff like debt slavery and just general unwarranted arrogance, a bit of sliminess. Still probably higher comfort than most of the Badlands, but still very low class with lots of monster dens and general people problems to worry about. On the edge of Chaste, we have Depot number 45, a train stop for hanger-ons and such to get evicted from their mobile homes, however temporary they may be. After everything is removed from the train, people in Depot 45 are sent to clean it out. While it's forbidden on the sea to attack the train, it's not forbidden to hitchhike. You can find monsters and people depending on the day, week, and hour a train comes in. It's easy coin, unless you get unlucky. In the Elven lands again, closer to Orcish territory this time, we have Sessenvane, which is a racial enclave for those who don't quite fit in. It's primarily humans, but you can find a lot of half-elves and half-orcish there who have no place to go in society. They're very independent by proxy of this, however, it's a village that often faces regional pressure from the elven owners for not fitting in. They get levied with higher taxes and tariffs on trade goods, and they tend to feel quite stuck on their own, yet oppressed by people they're related to on any end, really. Their biggest threats are, honestly, their neighbors. Lots of pressure from the outside. It's a very self-contained community, and going outside risks bandits or any other amount of troubles, whether it's social or violent. There are plenty of opportunities for adventurers to secure connections for them to the outside world. It's hard for the natives to travel, so people like escorts and city guards are very welcome. Dog agrees.
I'm about to say you've got one more. You haven't done your round two village.
So I haven't. Correct.
Well,
Let's.
it's good to go through and do the catch-up anyways.
It is. It'll save me time later. Let's see. What am I gonna do for a village? Oh, I had the idea. I was actually mulling it a little, and I completely forgot it when I started reading everything else. Let's dip down into Urkish territory. So, there is a reason that the Urkish are nomadic. They don't just like roaming around, although they do by now, and they don't just like raiding and pillaging, although it's certainly a perennial pastime by now. The reason the Urkish became raiders ancient ages ago, and still is because there are several thriving communities of ogres that practically have their own village. The thing about the ogres is they're a lot like the Urkish, just worse. Ogres are born with two heads, and one of those heads is perfectly sensible. However, when that head goes to sleep, the other one just causes the body to rampage around and cause trouble. It makes it hard for the Urkish to put down a stable community. Most of the Urkish annual meetups tend to happen far away from where known ogre communities are, and they tend to happen during a season where it's more wakeful for the reasonable ogre head. So the only really well-known stable place in Urkish territory is the village of Grunk. And it is the only place that any semi-friendly Urkish person will tell you to avoid. It's right in the middle of Urkish lands. It is where you can honestly find the majority of ogre people. They're not too prone to proliferating. They don't have a huge community, so it's where you'll find the most of them. But ogres tend to be enough trouble that when they rampage, they spread out from the middle in like almost rivets. If there were rivers dividing the land of Urkish, they would be made by ogres slamming into the land, rolling and thrashing. They're closer to almost minor natural disasters. So the middle of Urkish territory is Drunk, and while you can visit during some portions of the year, you might find some interesting things there. It's more of a problem. It's a very dangerous place to be, but there are reasons to go there. Because the ogres in their thrashing and rampaging will occasionally snatch up things that belong to the Urkish. They might even snatch up Urkish people, and very rarely a kobold. And that all gets brought back to Gurn, where they have their own small society of bartering and angry smashing against each other. There's no real hierarchy, there's no real leader. So if you're going to go for Gurn, it better be for a good reason. However, an Urkish that manages to reclaim Urkish treasures from Gurk usually pretty well seen in their tribe, and there's nothing against getting help to do it.
Solid.
All right, so that covers our village level enterprises. We have a lot. We're going to do a full recap, but first, we have one more round of planetary touch-up. If there's anything you want to do the big scale, now's the time. So, we are going to move on to our last round robin, and Severs will be starting this one.
Okay. I think I'm going to zoom even further out and hit the cosmic level, if that's okay with you guys.
Go for it.
And that we've established the lower planes and the underworld. I would like to hit that there are actually two sort of upper celestial planes, a nirvana and a paradise. One being sort of the epicenter of sort of goodness and life and your sort of feelings of what you hear when you or what you think of when you hear heaven.
Okay.
The sort of classic tropes about that sort of thing. That would be the paradise, and then over on Nirvana, it's associated more with sort of order and enlightenment and sort of knowing everything's place in the cosmology and being at one with one's true self. And so both are places that are sought after, and sort of introduce those elements of good is not always necessarily orderly, and orderly is not always necessarily good. So they actually have their own separate quote heavens.
Okay. I see it, I sees it, I sees it. And I'll go ahead and ask this then. Because the original vision for Arthas was they were pretty close to angelic beings in terms of scale, just originating from the planet instead. How do those two upper planes view Arthas?
Well, one of the things that can be is that while the Arthas are generated from the planet, they're sort of slightly transcendental in that they're almost closer to heaven than towards either of the heavens than your average layperson at ground level would be. They sort of I'd say that the heavens look upon them as probably almost an evolution of your standard people, and maybe even have sent divine blessings to them to help them sort of keep their station despite where they're at in the world.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Let's see, how am I gonna do this? I have a couple of ideas rumbling around. Be overrambly. This one's tough. I think I'm gonna take a blender to both ideas, chop them up, and make a terrible mix that nobody's happy with. Because that's my favorite solution for every problem. So, originally, I was going to do, introduce two main divines to the setting. One for cold and one for hot. And then I thought about the nice little invincible monster den on the eastern continent. And all I could think of was that is the third divine. And the problem was, when these divines came together and made the planet, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was almost like they were sleeping and bumped into each other. and a rock happened right in the middle, and suddenly there was a planet. A lot of things have happened since then. But one thing is that that bump made the beginnings of a third divine energy. And neither of the two that woke up to find this was happy about it, because this is now theirs. They're not willing to share. So, in smiting it, they weren't able to kill it, because it was made of both of them. However, they were able to deprive it of sense and some of its divine power. Not enough. So, instead, they made a nice little trap for it and just slapped it on the rock to keep an eye on it, and naturally started looking away and more. So while one continent hails the divine of cold primarily, and the other hails the divine of heat primarily, to some, that beast is an object worthy of forming a cult. It's the closest thing they have to a divine on the planet. People have keyed in on that. And while the cult isn't well seen, because naturally whenever this thing wakes up, it's a problem for everybody, there's potential in the future that that cult could reawaken the divine that is currently maddened and confused and bleeding from the head, and it could become the third divine one day. Or it could become something dark and terrible. It all depends. I think that is pretty happy for me, because I feel like no matter where you go, you're going to have religion crop up in some way or form. I think it's interesting to have very consolidated religions, though, compared to the usual smattering of a bunch. So I think that'll do it for me. Alright, Fletch, you got one planetary or cosmic level decision to make.
I'm also gonna be playing with religion
Oh boy.
in a strange place,
Oh boy.
as if to defy logic. In the center of Chase is an entertainment district, a casino, a temple, if you will, to fortune, luck, and wealth. Coins and dreams trade hands here every day. Every hand of cards is a prayer. Every time the roulette wheels spin, it's a dirge. All to a faceless god or goddess residing at the top floor. Whether it's physically there or not, who knows? That's the highest level of the temple. And here, any winner can be a priest.
Ah, yes, money. The greatest god of them all. Because if you've got it, everything's going your way, and if you don't, it could be a rough time.
And you just keep telling yourself that next hand, that next pull, that next shake of the dice, it'll come back around.
Hmm. What's one sort of miracle or portent the people of that temple see as a result of their god or goddess, their divine? What's their proof? In essence, their big, well, this couldn't have happened if it wasn't my god.
Those who walk away with their winnings find their luck outside the temple increasing. in the matters of business and the like.
Hmm. So it could be said that maybe several big players of the world find themselves there yearly or bi-yearly to kind of forecast how things are going to go.
Anyone who wants to go through and take the risk of finding fame and fortune also makes their way there. Because when you're down your luck, who knows if some kindly person won't go through and give you some task you can do.
Hmm. Interesting, interesting. I quite like it. So, let's go through a brief summary, a cliff notes of what we've put together. We have the planet of Pilot, 3 continents, 2 large, 1 small, a small island chain between the continents. There is a flotilla city in the ocean between continents, some transcontinental magic trains, a polar fiery deathland, and opposite that, a molten, constantly moving mineral and metal world tree-esque place, harboring as a cage for the road to the many hells, the void beyond, all of the dark things of the world and the divines about it. All the continents are at war in a conflict for something that still remains ill-defined to this day. Originally, it was a grudge born from people being oppressed in the eastern continent and migrating to the western, but who knows at this point? We have an old fallen empire in the southern islands that has given way possibly to the great tower that the arcane arts are now studied at. We've got an invincible monster reawakening every few decades or centuries to be brought down and laid low by the heroes of that generation. On the western continent, we have the raiders of the Urkish, the mines of the Kobolds, the elves and the Orcus, and their own societal strife. In the east, we have the great mechanical city of Chase and its innovations that spread to the world inevitably, the proud and ever victorious people of the Morvis in Corvus. And of course, the downtrodden in the Badlands, the descent of both demon and dragon that don't have the pure blood of the North, nor their strength, and just had generational luck in general. And down on the southern continent, we have the societies that just kind of survive and get along, that thrive on trade and arts, and regardless of monster or man, while they may not always see eye to eye, they can at least avoid drawing blood and try not to get drawn into the tangled weave of war and conflict elsewhere in the world. We've got penal colonies, we've got cruel planetary angels, we've got heavens and hells, 2 main deities, a giant casino temple for a god or goddess of fortune that nobody's quite sure about, but certainly there's some intrigue there, and plenty of fun little details yet to be dug into, plenty of room to explore and expand. That, I'm going to say, is as far as Pilot goes. I think it is a well-flourishing world of its own, and any adventures that happen there will have to be someone else's business. After all, we're pretty much done setting the scene now. So how do you guys feel about Pilot?
It's pretty solid. There's a lot to expand on here. We left just enough openings for probably the most important part of something like this to occur, where when the players react to certain things, you write that down.
Yeah,
We built
I
the
like it.
framework, and they're going to flesh it out.
Yeah, it's got a world that has plenty of hooks that you can catch on, but isn't necessarily something on rails, barring the railroad jokes. But
It was too easy. I think I like it for the fact that while it feels very distinctly fantasy, it doesn't feel like what you would run as per D&D. It doesn't feel like just a D&D setting. I definitely feel like it has a lot of flavor to itself. Like you could run it in D&D, but you definitely have to assemble a couple of the bits yourself.
yeah, I was gonna say it's one that while I know a lot of the things I was thinking was based on D&D, it feels almost closer to like how Dark Sun is than your standard D&D campaign.
The dog clearly has many things to say about that.
Yes.
I think it'd be interesting. If I tried to think of something else I would run it in other than D&D, from what I'm familiar with, I don't think it would be too bad to run in Warhammer Fantasy.
You have to go through and strip away the setting, but yeah, the system can easily do it.
Yeah. I think
We don't have any halflings, so we can trade the kobold and kobold in for halflings.
yeah,
Boom, done.
you could definitely do stuff like that. I feel like it's not the most mobile setting in the world. You can slap it into everything and have it work, but you can do a lot with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad. It's not bad at all. Any other thoughts in post, gentlemen?
So it was far different from the typical way I go through and start making settings myself, digging through history, find little bits and pieces here, and building up from that, which isn't a bad thing at all.
I thought it was really nice having the collaborative experience. It's one of those where it was interesting to see like some of my ideas in my head get thrown into the mix and then watch a twist get put on them and go, okay, yeah, that works, and it's not what I figured whenever I envisioned it, but it still works. Um, and it was nice getting someone else's base idea and going, okay, I see this now. Now I have something to go on for my next idea. So yeah, it was interesting and sort of nice doing it all together.
It's definitely not how I build my worlds either, because I tend to I need some kind of source material to pervert and work off of usually. And that means that a lot of my ideas usually come in bits and stages over a long time. Like just this morning I almost missed a lot of sleep because I went to lay down to bed and I was like trying to think about things. I was mulling through an issue with my system, and I ended up thinking about the setting instead, and I spent like 2 hours more up. I like sat up from bed, I rolled over to my computer, and I started putting in stuff about the setting that I knew I would forget later if I didn't, little details, and shoring up stuff that I forgot earlier or just didn't put in my document. So there's definitely a different work style, and the format so far feels pretty interesting. If I do end up doing another episode to this, it's definitely going to be a different world, and B, a different way of zooming in and out of the world, different way of passing the buck around. That's the kind of stuff I want to play around with, see what works best when you're doing collaborative world building. There's a lot of options to change things, and if I continue this, it's probably going to change in format a lot. I'd also like to have a good variety of guests. Today I invited people that I knew explicitly were, present or past GMs, people experienced with world building. But I think it'd also be pretty interesting to try stuff like this with people who've never done it before and see what they cook up because they're unfamiliar with putting together their own worlds and settings.
Yeah, I could see that ending up being, an exceptional experience just because it'll be the first time they go through and construct something. And those people, they don't put limits on themselves, so they'll take it to the nth. And if it ends up being a train wreck, it'll be a beautiful train wreck, one you can easily run, more than likely as well. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, to go through and look at existing settings, Ruby after season 3 started a staunch downhill decline, but even that can still be run. So
Shots fired.
look, Monty Ohm is a man who could animate in a program that wasn't meant to animate. He was chosen by God. All I'm saying.
Monty was something else, that's for sure. Cannot disagree with that. But that was kind of the core idea for this. Kind of because when I've had my first experience with Dungeons and Dragons, when I've gone beyond just hearing about other people playing it, when I've done it myself, I feel like it wouldn't be an uncommon thing to say that the first thing a player does after they're really into it is start imagining what would happen if X and Y. And I feel like that there are so many players out there that start their own campaigns because they want to try and build their own homebrew right away. You hear the tale all the time of DMs trying to start their first campaign. They've written their own world. They're real excited for it. And whether it goes for better or worse, I feel like that's a common experience. So I think world building is something that comes to a lot of creatives as maybe their first thing. I thought that would make a pretty interesting time. And I gotta say, I don't believe I'm wrong with what I have here. I did take pretty much everything down that we said. It's not all incomplete notes. I am not a master of notation, but it will go up in a public paste bin to be freely available if any of us or anyone else hearing this really wants to reference it. And we'll move on next time and find a new world to make a mess out of, I think.
Right.
Any final words, gentlemen?
Head empty, no thought. No, it was fun stuff, and I'm interested in taking a peruse over the final product and seeing sort of where my mind goes. Who knows? This could eventually be like, once my schedule clears up a little bit, something that I end up using as a setting and running a game of my own. So
If you do, definitely let me know. That would be a good post episode where we kind of review what happened with the world and see how things went with it. Be pretty interesting.
I'm considering the same thing myself, so yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well then, for now, that's gonna be it. We have set the scene, and we'll let the actors act as they will. Until next time, thank you guys so much for listening in, and I hope you have a wonderful day.